The second scripture lesson is Luke 12:22. He said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Oh, how much more valuable are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about all the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not keep striving for what you are to eat or what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying. For it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is in your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give alms, make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So this morning, I wanted to talk about, I don't know if you've seen headlines lately, but I've been seeing some about the loneliness epidemic. So recently, Dr. Vivek Murthy, the U.S. Surgeon General, released a report called "The Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation in the U.S." And the report states that being socially disconnected can be as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. Loneliness can increase the risk of premature death by 26% and raise the likelihood of heart disease, stroke, anxiety, depression, and dementia. Dr. Murthy writes, millions of people in America are struggling, and we know that loneliness is a common feeling that many people experience. It's like hunger or thirst. It's a feeling that the body sends us when something we need for survival is missing. So I've been kind of reading these articles, and again, common wisdom would be we went through a global pandemic. People were locked down, people were in isolation. So definitely they saw levels of anxiety and depression go up worldwide quite a bit, just the sense of isolation. But I started thinking, I think there's more to it than just that. I don't think we can blame it all on COVID. I start looking at our culture. And in our culture, sometimes we value achievement and consumerism so much for our identity, and I think that's at the cost of connection. And I think that might lead to some of our levels of anxiety and isolation. So in my younger days, I don't think I ever thought about the downside of rugged individualism. In fact, I sort of loved it. It just sounded fun, like it's kind of, you can be whatever you want to be, you can achieve, you can, it's all about you and your self-expression. But the first time I kind of noticed it from a different vantage point was when I was in high school. I was an exchange student in Colombia, South America. And the great thing about living outside your own country is you get to observe your culture from a new perspective. So the positive side of some of our cultural narratives might be that freedom of expression and being able to achieve great things, whatever it is, you have a lot of freedom. But the shadow side might be the isolation we might promote when we focus so much on achievement and climbing the ladder of success. So when I lived in Colombia, I lived with a wonderful intergenerational family. It was a big house, it was a grandmother's house. There was a big family I lived with, and the aunt and uncle lived there, and it was really great. And in fact, one of my Colombian friends told me that I was living with the Waltons of Colombia. So if you don't get that, you're too young, but the Waltons, it was a great thing. I attended an all-girls Catholic school, and I just started noticing little differences. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But one thing I noticed was that at school, everyone was so friendly and welcoming to me, and really to each other. And it was different than the American high school experience. Now, I liked school in the US, and I loved my friends, but I noticed there wasn't this sort of social hierarchy. Like different cliques and different groups, and you want to strive and make the sports team and get the best test scores. I think it's just in kind of our psyche of what we're supposed to do. And it was sort of like there was an unwritten rule that they started the baseline like, you're my friend, I like you. Now, that holds true unless you're like a total jerk, but they're going to start out with, you're part of the bigger group, and everybody's okay. You're accepted. You don't have to do anything for that. You're just part of the group. And I just started thinking, people being really warm and kind and accepting in high school, that's a great concept. But maybe it was like, again, looking at it, it's more about the collective group than the individual standing out. So sometimes this individual versus the group concept would show up in surprising ways. So once I was in another city on vacation with my very large Colombian family, and I ran into one of my classmates. She invited me to a country house the next day to swim in her pool. I didn't really know her very well, and I was really excited. I told my family, I'm gonna go to her house. And then I went from excited to mortified, as only a 17-year-old can be, when my entire giant family loaded up in 2 cars and decided, we're all going to her pool. And I remember thinking, this is so awkward. And I don't even know my classmate very well, and this giant group is showing up uninvited. And I was probably, as a 17-year-old, sulking in the car, like, oh no. But it turns out this was completely normal, and it was more than socially acceptable. That if you're friends with someone, you're friends with the entire family. So when I was invited, it was a very collective invitation. So I was so worried about that it could be socially awkward, which it might have been in other cultures, but I almost missed what a lovely thing it is that they are so inclusive and that the social group is so tightly woven together. Okay, a couple other social misunderstandings. My classmates would ask me, again, just think about how people see the U.S. when you're not in the U.S. They'd say, hey, is it true when you're 18 you get kicked out of your house? And again, in Colombia, most people go to college and live at home, and maybe until they were, had their career, they'd get married and form their own homes, and they just didn't see living in a dorm or living alone was this great rite of passage. They just didn't get it, see it the same way. They would also ask, is it true that when people get old, we make them leave their home and go to a nursing home? Now, they probably exist somewhere, but I never saw like an assisted living or nursing home in Colombia because living with and near your extended family was just the culture. So, not that Colombia was perfect, but I just remember seeing our culture in a new light and kind of observing the strengths and weaknesses of some of our cultural narratives. So even though I learned a lot and I loved my experience in Colombia, once I was back in the States, I followed the path that seemed to make the most sense and focused on getting into a good school, finding a job, getting married, having a family, and continuing to try to grow my career. So maybe it was on a subconscious level, but I think I thought you had to check these boxes. And these were the things that would ensure your future happiness. Happiness was a place to get to after you worked really, really hard. That's just not fun. So I think I've always had this striving energy, and just ask Clay. He coined that phrase for me once. We were on vacation, and he pointed out that being chill is not my greatest strength. And I was like, and I kind of get it. It's like, give me a goal, something to think about, like how do we maximize growth, and let's set a benchmark. And I love it. Like I do that on vacation sometimes, like, here's our agenda. And he was like, that's not what vacation is. Okay, so I do read a lot of books on like how to make the most of things, and even in personal life, like what makes a good life. Or what do dying people wish they would have done differently in their life? It might sound like it's, reading for inspiration, but I think underneath it, it's that weird striving of like, how do we make the most of this life? How do we optimize for a good life? How can I set my goals and measurables for a good life? And I can tell you that the research shows that it is not by trying to find some kind of life hack and goals and benchmarks, it's the opposite of that. So I'm going to share a little bit of the research. So, because of my fascination with maximizing things, there's a new book out. I would recommend it, and it's called The Good Life by Robert Waldinger. This is one of the researchers. If you've read about this, it's a fascinating Harvard study that started in 1938. So it's been going on for over 85 years. And they started, and they wanted to study different people and see what makes a good life, what adds to your happiness. So there were hundreds of people. Many of them were Harvard sophomores. And then this was during the Depression. They also took a group of young men in some of the poorest neighborhoods in Boston. And they're going to check their, physical health, mental health, relationships, careers, and follow them through life. And it continues. So now they followed them, they were following their children, and sometimes their grandchildren. And some were rich, some were poor. One was the President of the United States. Some achieved great heights. But the goal of the study was determining what creates happiness and well-being. And the one thing that determined their happiness and well-being was the quality of their relationships. Full stop. It wasn't all the achievements, the money, anything else. It was the social connections and relationships. So this is what they found. Warm relationships seem to keep people both physically stronger and kept their brains sharper. It also led to less depression, less diabetes, less heart disease, and people recovered from illness more quickly when they had better connections with other people. And at first, they didn't trust the data. I mean, this is over decades. So they were, I don't know, maybe 30 years in, they start seeing this, and they weren't sure this could be true, but then they started seeing other studies that confirmed it. And it's like, how can relationships basically get into our body and shape our health? Well, much of it comes down to stress, which is an inevitable part of all of our lives. Good relationships turn out to be a stress regulator. So for example, if something happens to you that is stressful, and you spend much of the day ruminating about it, and you feel your body going into that fight or flight response, at the end of the day, if you have someone to talk to, so it could be someone at home, or you could call someone on the phone, you come back to equilibrium after the stressful situation. If you're isolated or lonely, and you don't have that someone to share it with, then you can stay in chronic fight or flight mode, and that can lead to chronic inflammation and circulating stress hormones. So an important marker in the study was having someone you could call if you were sick or scared. It doesn't have to be a significant other or romantic relationship. It doesn't mean you have to have a million friends, but what is essential is to have at least one person that you can count on, someone who has your back. So when they studied the participants, and when they were in their 80s, they asked, what are you most proud of? And it was always their relationships. They didn't say, I made a lot of money, or I won some big award. Instead, they said, I was a good friend. I was a good mentor. I raised healthy kids. I was a good partner. At the end of life, what matters most is the strength and warmth of our connections to others. Okay, I gotta get a water, sorry. So I think I know this intellectually, that it's all about love and relationships, and that's what matters when all is said and done. But it's really easy for me to forget that. When I was younger, I wanted to get good grades, good school, good career, and I thought that would ensure my happiness. So now I have a business, and sometimes I worry about managing it and making sure that the staff and agents are okay, making sure we have enough money to make payroll, enough in reserves to weather any economic storms, and that becomes the focus. Even though the intentions might be good, I want to take care of the people who depend on me for jobs, and it can sound noble, but even so, I might forget that all of this is temporary, and what matters in the end is the relationships and love. So Bill talks about this when he talks about the eternal versus the temporary, and that a lot of our suffering comes because we are focused on the temporary. So on financial security, what might happen in the future, political situations, when we could or should shift our gaze to the eternal. So what is eternal? And I think about when this life is done, what happens? I'm not exactly sure what happens, but what I believe is spirit is eternal. And the thing that goes with us is the love that we had all around us. The only thing we're going to kind of hold on to. So now I have to put a plug in for the folk rock indie group, the Avett Brothers. If anybody knows the Avett Brothers, they have a song. Nancy loves the song. She wants to play it at her funeral. Anyway, it's called No Hard Feelings. And they're contemplating what happens at the end of life. And much like Bill Perman, I think they came to the same conclusion about what is eternal and what lasts. So I have to have gratitude to the spiritual direction I received from Bill Perman and also the Avett Brothers. And so here's some of the lyrics. So if you get a chance, this song is so beautiful, I would recommend listening to it. So one part of the lyrics says, when my body won't hold me anymore and it finally sets me free, where will I go? Will I join the ocean blue or run into a savior true and shake hands laughing and walk through the night straight to the light, holding the love I've known all my life with no hard feelings? And so that rings true to me. It's an image I just see, like at the end, it's, what we're going to hold are that love. That's the thing we take with us.